Where am I?
The pit of despair. Don't even think. Don't even think about trying to escape.
Hey everyone, and welcome to Let's Pod This. My name is Andy Moore. I am the executive director of Let's Fix This, which is our parent organization. Well, it's a parent organization. The podcast is not an organization by itself. It is a feature of the organization. This is the worst start we've had in a while, Scott.
I mean, it's not bad. It's just a little meandering.
Well, yes. It's been a long week.
That is the God's honest truth.
So again, I'm Andy Moore. Hello, I'm one of your hosts. And I'm joined today by Scott Melson. Hello, Scott.
What's up, guys?
Scott, thanks for holding down the fort last week. Thanks to Grant Herms for filling in for me. That was also very helpful.
Yeah, dude. He was great. I think he was a little nervous. He said about trying to fill in your shoes for the week, but I think he.
That's because I have giant shoes. Literally, I wear a size 15.
Really?
I do.
That's impressive.
It's problematic because I wanted to order some Adidas Sambas the other day for old school effect. They don't make them in my size.
Are your feet like paddles?
Yes, I can swim very quickly.
It's like if you scuba, you don't even need you don't even need flippers.
It's helpful in Oklahoma wind. Also, I don't fall over very easy.
Yeah. Interesting. No, Grant was excited to be here. I think he did a great job, and we're, like you said, certainly grateful to him for sitting in and being across the table, so that our fair listeners were not stuck having to listen to me ramble by myself. A 45-minute monologue by Scott Melson is probably not in anyone's best interest.
Perhaps not. But I did like, as we talked about last week, and Grant, if you're listening, seriously, thanks again for filling in. And Scott said you were nervous because normally in news, Grant is used to kind of reading a script that maybe he's written for a story. Right. And here we're just winging it, sentence by sentence most of the time.
No scripts for us.
And so I was like, oh, right. Well, it does take a real man or lady to speak off the cuff.
It's certainly, I think, one of the things that makes a medium like radio or podcasting. I really enjoy radio shows. I enjoy a lot of NPR shows. I enjoy a lot of podcasts, and the non-scripted nature of it is one of the things that I really like. So I think it's fun to produce a show like that, and certainly hopefully fun for you guys to listen to.
And the plus side is that we can go back and edit what we're saying also. So ours is not live, so Grant has the upper hand there.
That's 100%. Live would freak me out.
Whenever I've done a live interview, I do get a little bit nervous.
Yeah.
What if my nose explodes? What if something happens?
Well, I mean, nose exploding, that's interesting.
It could happen. So this week, let's start with a recap. The big news of the week: Sine Dead.
Thank God.
Or, as the Latins say, Sine Dead.
That's, so I think I mentioned this last week, and we had to cut it for time. Sorry, guys, but I was making fun of Andy about 2 weeks ago because he was saying it was Sine Dead, and I was like, what, do you speak Latin? And he said, no, I don't. Turns out he does. It is, in fact, Sine Dead, according to how to pronounce this.
But in a state where we've got cities like Prague and Miami, I'm not surprised that we might say Sine Dead. It is weird we say Sine Dead and not just Sine Dead.
Yeah, it's never made a lot of sense to me. It's funny. I said thank God, because as I've talked about, and you and I have talked about both in private and on the pod for the last couple of weeks. I think we've been ready for them to be done. There's no question that the legislators themselves have been ready to be done for a while now.
Right, 17 months, right?
Yeah,
of
this
session
has been,
mostly constant. So
we've had. I mean, it is not an exaggeration to say that since last January, we have had about four. We've had the amount of time they have been in session would typically take about 4 years that they've done in the last year and a half. So
wow, that's, to put it in those terms, that's impressive.
Yeah. So there's no question that they're ready for a break and we're ready for a break. I do confess, speaking for myself, I really wish they had chosen to spend their last 2 weeks focused on some different things than they did. But, I don't get to tell them what bills to hear, so they get to make that decision for themselves.
the last week of session is always a bit rough, right? Like, I think every year. And so this year is no exception. However, this is the first time that I'm aware of that they finished this early.
It's been since 2015. I don't know if they've ever finished this early.
I don't think it's even this early.
2015 was the last time that they were early at all. And, you're right. Like, it is typical to see the last, few days and weeks of session with lots of late nights. Sometimes there are some shenanigans. However, I think what's different about this year, and there were several people there was a nice thread, I forget who had it, there was a nice thread on Twitter kind of discussing this. Usually the shenanigans that we see at the end of the year and the late nights and the debates and the back and forth have to do with the budget. So they save the budget for the very last thing. They've passed everything else has been done.
Right.
And they kind of shove the budget through at the very end.
Because they're dealing with deciding where to cut.
Right. However, this year there were no cuts necessary, and the biggest part of the budget, education, about 51% of the budget was done, 4 weeks ago. Mm-hmm. So they didn't have that to deal with. But one of the consequences of that was that lots of policy bills that normally would have already been dispensed with were kind of put on the agenda this week. Bills that, we've talked about zombie bills here before. There were several bills that we had all thought were kind of dead, weren't going anywhere, that ended up coming back this week. And not only were they put back on the agenda, but they were heard, and several of them ultimately passed. After a lot of, in some cases, a lot of questioning and debate, and in some cases, very little questioning and debate, and just lots of procedural maneuvers on the part of both parties. So it's definitely a typical last week of session in terms of the late nights and lots of action. But I think that the context of that looks a little bit different this year than what we typically expect.
Right. And I forget every year of the, this is our second actual year of session with Let's Fix This, that at the end of session, strange and spooky things happen with the bills, right? Like we get zombie bills, we get bills that weren't there, and they get dropped into like special conference committees, and they go through both chambers, like by the end of the day, things that don't even make sense.
Yeah, and just for you guys listening, the reason this happens, because if you have paid, I shouldn't say if you've paid attention, if you've listened to us for any episodes recently, we've spent a lot of time talking about deadlines. So, this is the deadline for bills to be heard out of committee. This is the deadline for bills to be passed off the floor in the chamber of origin. This is the deadline for bills to be passed in the opposite chamber. So you may be asking yourself, well, wait a second, Scott and Andy, you guys have said that there have been all these deadlines. How can there possibly be new bills being added at the end? There's a couple of ways. So one, bills that have failed earlier in the process, that language can be extracted. Okay, like so. Let's say I'm making up a bill number. Let's say you had House Bill 123. Okay, and House Bill 123 failed, but there was another bill, House Bill 456, and House Bill 456 got through the House, and it got through committee, and it got through the floor, and it passed the Senate, maybe with an amendment or something, and so then it comes back to the House. What legislators can then do is they can take House Bill 456 and delete all of the language, and then they can take the language from House Bill 123 and stick it in House Bill 456. And even though it effectively creates a brand new piece of legislation, the original bill, the title, House Bill 456, is still there. And that is what has made it through the legislative process. So that is a common vehicle by which bill language that was thought to be dead can make a reappearance at the end of session. Mm-hmm. That's one way they can do it. The other thing that they can do is use what's called a shell bill. So every year there are several bills that essentially are filed with nothing in them other than a title, a title and a bill number. There's no legislative language. But those bills are kind of held over and pushed through the process so that at the end, if there's a new policy priority or a bill that leadership usually really, really wanted to see make it through that didn't, they have a vehicle that they can insert language into and get something through at the last minute. So I think the main way that we saw this happen at the end of session this year was several bills that had original language was deleted and new language was inserted, and then there were lots of floor amendments. The floor amendment process was used.
Yeah, it was used more this year than usual.
Yeah, and a floor amendment is just when you have a bill being heard on the floor and then a member stands up and says, I want to amend this bill and add additional language.
Right now, as opposed to submitting it earlier or something. And it's worth noting that all of this is completely legal. This is part of how the system is designed. It doesn't necessarily come across as, we'll say, fair. And that's, I think, for us at home, for me, like watching some of this, I'm a guy who likes rules. I think they give some structure to society. Not all rules. My office gets to wear jeans on Friday. That violates the dress code, but we do it anyway. And so some things are okay. And I'm sure there's someone that will argue that rules are made to be broken. I'm just saying, when it comes to legislating your state, maybe sticking with some rules. And because it's predictable, right? And we would like opportunity for things to be heard and reviewed and vetted and discussed and robust. And I know that this will be no surprise to listeners that Scott and I are big fans of robust conversation and debate. So that's my personal preference. However, there are times that expediency is valued. Sure.
And I think, there's a bill that we'll talk about here in a minute that really exemplifies this process. And, I agree with you, Andy. None of these things that we're talking about in terms of, using shell bills and floor amendments and, committee substitutes or floor substitutes, they're not against the rules. But I think what frustrates me is when procedure is used not to make a better piece of legislation, but although the people that are doing it would say that's what they're doing.
Beauty's in the eye of the beholder.
That's true. But when these kind of procedural maneuvers are used to circumvent the process and enact something into law that the regular process, the process of regular order has said, like, no,
right,
we don't want this.
And also, it just always sucks when if you feel like you're on the losing side of this, right? Because this kind of procedural maneuver, to use your term there, is used by both parties, whoever's in power, right? Like, they use their power to get their agenda done.
Yeah, you have the majority party in either chamber has a substantial advantage when it comes to parliamentary maneuvers, for sure.
So we are Sine Dead now. Sine Dead, I suppose. And we
are Sine Dead.
So a couple of things that might happen henceforth. One, I think we've mentioned the last few episodes, is that, as many of you may know, there's a state question on the June 26th primary ballot. This will be a statewide election. Everybody, you better go vote, because there'll be lots of races on the vote, like lots of candidates, and at least one state question, and that state question is 788.
What is state question 788, Andrew?
Well, I'm glad you asked, Scott. It has to do with medical marijuana.
Marijuana?
That's right.
That's like a drug.
Reefer madness. So what we have right now is a state question that, if it passes, will cause a lot of hullabaloo at the state because it's got a really short time frame. So it comes out, they've got like 30 days, 60 days, I forget, to put it into law and to get everything in place. And the way it's written, the health department is supposed to oversee everything. As you know, they are not maybe in the position or equipped to do that.
Yeah, and they've had a tough year.
They've had a tough year. They're turning a corner, I think, but they're still not there yet. So there's some structure that needs to be in place. Should it pass? We didn't know if they were going to talk about it this session or not. They didn't. And so if State Question 788 passes in June, we will almost definitely see a special session of the legislature to come back in to deal with this. They may do it beforehand, preemptively, just in case.
No, they won't, because they just Sine Dead, so they won't.
They could.
I mean, they could, but they've said they won't.
Right. It doesn't make any sense.
Well,
because if you don't...
It makes sense. And to me, it makes way more sense to do it now, right? Like, and I'll tell you why. Here's my case. So just to make sure everybody's clear what Andrew is saying is, if they pass State Question 788, there has to be and medical marijuana is now legal in the state of Oklahoma, that action doesn't take place for 30 days until after the state question has been passed, right? So it's 30 days before marijuana is legal. There is some consternation because our state question is written in such a way that it would be the most permissive medical marijuana law anywhere in the country. There are many folks at the Capitol who feel that if it passes, there is going to need to be a much more robust regulatory framework in place in order to kind of manage this new, like, industry, this new, what do you want to call it? This new...
Yeah, industry. Again, they need rules.
They need rules.
Because right now it's written medical, anybody for any reason can go get it. The health department's supposed to oversee stuff, and there's no money for it. There's no, to like put in people to inspect situations and whatever.
And the reason that I think they should do this now, rather than waiting to see if 788 passes, is one, people are pretty optimistic that it's going to pass. And two, if you start now, you have more time. There's a bill, I believe it's in the House, right now that takes the regulatory framework that has been used with varying degrees of success in states around the country and applies it to Oklahoma. It's about 350 pages, just this one bill.
That's a big bill.
Yeah. I mean, like, this is a complicated issue. Why would you want to put yourself in a situation where it's like, oh, crap, it passed, so now we have 4 weeks to get this done? Why wouldn't you start now?
Because if it doesn't pass, then they can just stay at home. They didn't waste any time.
I mean, I guess, but it's like, you're like, okay, if it passes, we're going to have 4 weeks, so we'll do a terrible job. Or we can just take the chance that it's going to pass and do a decent job now, right?
I mean, they could come back in and pass it right away.
Right. I mean, I understand why they're not doing it, right? Everybody's tired. Everybody wants to go home. These guys want to go back to their districts. They want to they want to quit being at the Capitol all day and all night. Like, I understand why they feel like they need a break. Mm-hmm. But, like, one, you signed up for this. Two, the reason we've had special sessions this year, in my opinion, is because past legislatures have largely abdicated their responsibilities when it comes to making sure the state is on solid financial footing and able to fund itself. So they've been in special session fixing mistakes. You know what I mean? Like, they've been in session. Right. You're going to have to put in the time at some point. So you can put in the time to regulate marijuana well now, or you can put in the time later after the laws have been on the books for 6 months or a year or 18 months and we're having all kinds of problems. Like, you can do it then, or you can just do it. Like, to me, it kind of boils down to do it right the first time, right? Just do it right the first time, and then don't worry about it.
As a physician, you might say an ounce of prevention is better than a pound of treatment. I don't know what the end of that sentence is.
I mean, an ounce of prevention is, depending on the disease you're talking about, better than several pounds of prevention, right? Like, I mean, an ounce to a pound is a 1-to-16 ratio. In terms of, like... I mean, in terms of cost savings, in terms of life expectancy.
This feels like one of the economics classes I'm wrapping up right now.
I'm just saying that an ounce of prevention can be worth well more than a pound of cure.
A pound of cure. That's how it ends.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's move on. And so that's in the future. We'll obviously keep you in the know if we go back into special session.
When? You heard it here. When?
When. Let's move into discussion of a few bills. There were a whole bunch of bills that passed this week. We're not going to do them all because that's long and boring. But 3 that got a lot of news coverage, we'll say, and that you probably have heard about. You may have feelings about them. We will try to present them in a factual and unbiased manner, to a degree.
It will probably be clear how I feel about them. I apologize if that offends you.
The first one is Senate Bill 1221. This bill deals with criminal charges, and basically it passed. So all these bills passed. We're going to discuss. This one deals with allowing children under the age of 18 to serve life without parole. Basically makes that legal.
Yeah, and so this is a great example of a floor amendment. Kind of the short story on this bill. The bill had gone through the regular process. It had passed off the House floor. It had gone through committee, and then I believe it was Representative Harold Wright, who's the pro tem of the House, introduced a floor amendment. This was a request amendment. So the District Attorneys Association of Oklahoma had come to Representative Wright and said, "Hey, we really think that if you insert this provision, it will be better." The original bill mandated the mandated that the pardon and the pardon and parole boards for Department of Corrections include people who are mental health experts,
Like me.
Yeah. So the intent.
They didn't invite me. It was
Yeah, they should invite you. The original intent of the bill was that now the parole board, by law, has to have mental health experts in place. This was part of criminal justice reform. It's intended to give the mental health professional community a voice, I think, in determining who really can and cannot come out of prison. The District Attorneys Association said, hey, we think this bill will be better if you add an amendment that says juveniles can be sentenced to life without parole at the discretion. This is what's interesting. At the discretion of a judge, not a jury. Okay?
Right. And there's some other provision in there that it makes it harder to do than what just the quick summary is.
Yeah, yeah. And there was, I think, tell me if you think this is overstating, Andy. I think to say that there was outrage about this on the House floor from members of both parties, actually.
Yeah, it just looks bad, right?
Yeah,
Like, this is one of those bills that, like, the optics of it, of, like, why? Like, if you're talking about 16, 17-year-old offenders who commit some heinous crime, okay, like, I get it. But they wrote it so open-ended that, in theory, you could convict an 8-year-old and put them... They're not going to do that.
Well, you can't do an 8-year-old. It'd be a 13.
Oh, 13, okay.
13 is the youngest. But, yeah, no, it was... And we talked about...
That's the other caveat to it, is that they have to be ruled that they are unable to be rehabilitated.
Which I don't know how you know that at 13. Like, I don't know how you make that determination. And so...
Is there a mental health expert involved in that piece?
There is, but I think most mental health experts that are worth their salt will tell you...
Are going to say no.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, so
at 13, you can't make that determination.
Right. And so, again, I'm cutting you off on purpose.
That's fine.
Because then this bill doesn't do anything, right? Like, it's a lot of... Maybe it's worth getting angry about because it looks bad and it's unnecessary. But the fact is, I can't imagine, except in some super heinous situation where an older teenager who's 16 or 17 commits a heinous crime, that they get life without parole. But can't they charge them as an adult anyway in those cases?
Yeah, they can. But the other thing is, I mean, I disagree with you when you say that the bill doesn't do anything, because the idea that the bill doesn't do anything presumes that no mental health expert would ever rule that a 13-year-old can't, or a 14-year-old or 15-year-old can't be rehabilitated.
Right. It opens a door that we don't want to walk through.
Right. And I'm not trying to I'm not trying to disparage the mental health community. I love the mental health community. I wish we had more mental health experts in Oklahoma. My wife is one of them. You're one of them. Like, I'm not trying to, like, call out that group of professionals as a group or any individuals. I'm just saying it shouldn't even be a question, right? It should not come down, in my opinion, to the discretion of an individual mental health provider to determine, like, is this person able to be, like, how do you determine that someone can be rehabilitated or that they can't, right? Particularly at 13, right? I mean, maybe you say that they've got antisocial personality disorder, so they are a true psychopath. They have no possibility of feeling empathy, but there are psychopaths. There are people who are by the clinical definition of psychopathy, right? Or not psychopaths, sociopaths. There are people who are clinical sociopaths walking around all over the place amongst us every day, right?
Yeah, I mean, they may have predispositions and not committed any crimes. Right.
I'm just saying, like, I just don't understand what kind of criteria you're going to apply. Like, how are you? It's not that I think a lot of psychiatrists or psychologists are going to make that determination, but we shouldn't even be allowing for the possibility of it.
Right.
That's the point I'm trying to make.
This is my general stance about laws, is that we shouldn't open a door unless we intend to walk through it. So this opens a door that we hope we never walk through, and we have no intention of walking through it. But the door's open. Don't open the door. Just keep the door closed. I feel like I'm talking to my kids.
Yeah.
All right.
So that was one from this week. We had talked about that bill a little bit on last week,
yeah.
And then I think that it went to the Senate this week. It passed the Senate, and now it'll go. Or was it a Senate bill?
A Senate bill went to the House.
Okay, and then it got amended in the House and went back to the Senate. And the Senate,
like a damn game of ping pong.
Yeah,
down there.
and the Senate accepted the amendment and it went back to the governor. Or went to the governor. So.
All right, so similar numbers. That was Senate Bill 1221. The next one we'll discuss is Senate Bill 1212, constitutional carry. Pew 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 pew. May the 4th be with you.
Yeah,
that's today.
Thoughts, Andrew?
So
Constitutional carry.
So again, maybe I'm just tired at this point, but a lot of these bills I just don't feel like getting outraged about, because me getting outraged doesn't change the outcome of this, right? And me yelling in my house doesn't change it. Here's the deal with this bill. It allows people to carry your gun wherever you want, just around, unless the venue prohibits it, right? So you can't carry it into to basketball games or concerts or the state capitol or courthouses or whatever. Anyway, anywhere it says no guns, you can't bring it. But you can open carry, concealed carry, whatever, without having a license. So it just allows you to carry your gun, no license needed. You still have to do a background check to buy it, but you don't have to get like a concealed carry or open carry license.
Yeah. So the big deal about this, we talked about the bill some last week. This is another good example of kind of process at work. 1212 was initially just to allow the carrying of firearms in wildlife refuges. The provision to allow the unlicensed carrying of a fire alarm wherever fire alarms can lawfully be carried was a floor amendment offered by Representative Cootie. The bill went to the Senate. One point of contention in the Senate was that this bill does actually have a fiscal impact. And the reason I have a fiscal impact...
It does, because we don't get the fees.
Right, because, so right now you have to pay a fee to the OSBI when you get a concealed carry permit. Mm-hmm. That would take away that fee. So that means that's a loss of about $4.7 million a year to OSBI, as well as 60 positions. OSBI, 60 full-time positions. OSBI, Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation, put out a statement urging Governor Fallon to veto the bill, saying that with the loss of $4.7 million in permit revenue and the loss of 60 additional positions, that the OSBI, the Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation, the Oklahoma-specific agency that is analogous to the FBI, will be operating at 63% of their full capacity.
Oh, I didn't hear that. And so, I mean, it's funny that they're arguing for a bill that kills jobs, too. I mean, that's...
Right? Like, this is, I mean, law enforcement is against this bill, right? OSBI's, Oklahoma City PD, Tulsa PD, most of the major city police forces have come out in opposition to this bill. They have said that what this does is that the bill makes it impossible or very difficult for law enforcement to determine who is legally and illegally carrying a weapon. Because now what you'd have to do is say the person's running a weapon. Now you have to detain them, give enough time to check and detain them for enough time to check all of the databases to determine, is this person a felon? Do they have any outstanding warrants?
Right.
Like, you have to basically do a full check on this person to see if there's anything that would prohibit them from carrying a gun. Mm-hmm. Proponents of the bill argue that, the Second Amendment says the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. And I don't disagree. It 100% says that in the second half of the amendment. The first half says a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Well-regulated militia it's like in the first 5 words, okay?
Pew pew. So, anyway, this hasn't been signed by the governor yet.
And honestly, I mean, I think, I would put the odds that she signs it at probably 90% or greater.
Yeah.
But I honestly don't know that it's a done deal.
No, it may not be because it's just unnecessary. Again, we don't need it. I don't know why you're carrying your gun to the donut shop or the soccer fields or whatever. Just I understand. I hear the arguments. I understand why. It's just not for me. For me, like, that's an expensive piece of equipment that could kill a person at a long distance, and that's unnecessary for normal life. So, that's 1212. Moving on to Senate Bill 1140. This will be the final bill we'll discuss today. And that is a bill that came up. This was maybe the most hotly contested bill of the week, maybe of the year. It's a bill that would, and it was one that went from the House to the Senate. From the Senate to the House, back to the Senate, back to the House, and now onto the governor. And it protects the perceived rights of religious organizations that do adoptions and placements, and says that they can refuse to place a child in a home or with a family at their discretion, basically that somehow offends
that
their
would force them to violate their written religious or moral beliefs.
right. So basically, LGBT couples, single individuals, perhaps whatever they felt like violates their written things. So maybe other religions. There's some question about that. Put it out there. So a couple of points of contention with this. One is that that these organizations receive state funds, and so it is kind of codifying discrimination based on someone's gender identity, and that entity receives state funds. There was an amendment that would take the money out of it, but that got rejected, and so it's moot. And I know the ACLU, there's laws like this in some other states, and I think the ACLU has kind of said
they're all getting sued.
Yeah, well, but I don't know if they're all getting sued because I saw Nick Singer on Twitter, who was over there, said some of his colleagues at the ACLU have said like a lawsuit might not be successful. They may not pursue it because it's
interesting.
It's as we said earlier before we started recording, it's kind of at the junction between two civil liberties, right? So the First Amendment to freedom of religion there and religious expression, bumping it up against discrimination laws and people's their rights there. And so it is a tricky issue. My point in this, as I said to you before we started recording, is that most people who are wanting to adopt, who are looking to adopt, who are going down that path that is lengthy and expensive and emotionally draining and can be really difficult, are going to go to an organization and work with an organization through which they feel most comfortable. And they are not going to go to one that they don't feel comfortable, that wouldn't be reciprocal there. And so it's probably discriminated against people who wouldn't be going there in the first place. So it's like a self-selection issue. Now, I'm not saying that it's, in my opinion, that it's okay that state dollars are spent. Just saying, again, this is probably a law that opens a door that we don't want to open because we don't want to have to walk through it. But it's kind of a moot point, in my opinion.
The reason that you're wrong, Andy.
That pause was an eye roll, a giant, huge-ass eye roll from Scott.
No. Your point is well taken. And I think you're right. I think there definitely is probably some selection bias, right? Like if you are a gay couple, you are probably not going to Catholic Charities to adopt a child, is my guess. Mm-hmm. I personally, speaking for me, Scott, I have a problem with state. The whole argument to me that we need to protect their religious freedom. The religious freedom of these organizations is not under attack. They are free to believe whatever they want and practice their beliefs however they want to. What they are not free to do, in my opinion, or should not be free to do, is accept state dollars and use state dollars to fund their practicing of religion. Right? Like that's one thing.
Any more than the state isn't giving tax dollars to a church directly.
Right. So that's one thing. The other thing that was really offensive to me about this, and this is something you and I had talked about before we started recording, was the process that this went through. So 1140.
Oh, right. Yeah, this is a whole separate issue now.
Yeah. Like, so 1140 SB 1140 was introduced in the Senate. It passed committee. It passed the Senate floor. It then went to the House, where it was assigned, I believe, to the Judiciary Committee. It went to the Judiciary Committee, where Representative Leslie Osborne added an amendment that prohibited, basically said that this law would not apply to any organizations that accept state or federal funds. It then went to the floor. On the floor of the House, multiple attempts were made to remove that amendment. None of them were successful. A majority of the House of Representatives did not vote to take the amendment off, and the bill passed the House with the amendment intact. So far, so good. We've kind of followed the letter of the law. We then went to the bill has to go back to the Senate because an amendment was added in the House. Senator Greg Treat, who was the author in the Senate, refused the amendment, which is his purview, right? The author of the bill can say, no, I reject the amendment that was added by the House. They're completely free to do that. When that happens, the next option is for the bill to go to what's called a conference committee. Normally, the bill would be sent to a conference committee that is like kind of a mix of the committees from which it came out of, right? Mm-hmm. So like it was in Judiciary initially because it should have gone to the Judiciary Conference Committee. Leadership was aware that it would likely not pass the Judiciary Conference Committee. So they created a special conference committee, and I don't mean they created like a special conference committee for all the difficult bills. They literally called created a committee called Conference Committee for Senate Bill 1140. Okay, that was the name of the committee. Instead of assigning the normal number of committee members, they assigned half of the normal number of committee members. And they did that so that the threshold of votes that the bill needed to get out of committee would be lower. They then assigned members to that committee who they knew would vote in favor of the bill with no additional restrictive language. Okay, so that got the bill out of conference committee. Then it went back to the House, and it was put on the floor. It went to the Senate, where it was passed off of the floor, with Senator A.J. Griffin offering a pretty passionate debate about why it was a bad bill and voting against it, largely as a sign of protest. Then it went back to the House, where it was introduced on the floor. It was not subject to any questioning. It was not subject to any debate. The minority would allege that multiple motions were made during the process that were ignored by the chair that should have been taken into consideration. And then the thing that really just gets my lights my fire about this, I believe that there were 26 senators or 26 House members who didn't vote. Right? So there were, and I believe, don't quote me on this, I believe that they were all members of the majority. So there were it's either 23 or 26. 26 members of the majority don't like this bill, okay? They don't want it to pass. They don't want it on their record that they voted for it, but they don't have the stones to vote against it.
Well, those are two different things.
They voiced their support, okay? They voted down all the procedural maneuvers to try and table the bill, to try and get the bill sent back to a regular committee. They voted with their party to, defeat all of those motions. And then when it came time to vote on the bill, they left the floor, went to their office and said, now when they're asked about it, when they campaigning this fall, I actually didn't vote on that bill. I wasn't on the floor when that was voted on. Mm-hmm. That's an abdication of their responsibility. It's cowardly. Okay. I understand politically why they did it, but that is why you're there. Okay. If you support the bill, then get on the floor and vote for it. Mm-hmm. If you don't, then get on the floor and vote against it. But don't go hide in your office and pretend that you didn't know what was happening, right? Particularly when you supported the process that led to that point in its entirety. I'm sorry. That's
Scott's angry.
The representatives, they're there to represent us. They're there to represent their constituents. And this bill went through a process whereby a majority said the best representation of this law for our constituents is that it contains an amendment that says state and federal funds can't be used by these agencies. Mm-hmm. And then that language was stripped out and subjected to a process that is literally unprecedented by the leadership so they could pass the bill that they wanted, regardless of what a majority of members had done with the bill. And that to me, that makes me angry because that's a mockery of the way the system is supposed to work.
Right. A friend of mine's kind of a leadership guru here in town, and I saw he tweeted just a little while ago, and his tweet said, inconsistency undermines credibility. And I thought that is true, and that makes a lot of sense, and it's probably relevant in this conversation. Regardless of which party's in power, these kind of shenanigans do undermine the credibility of those that are doing it, right? Like this inconsistency or doing things that are unprecedented in order to push something through, but then also saying like, well, we couldn't get this bill through because of deadlines, but then we found a way to get this other one through anyway. That kind of stuff just kind of circumvents the system, and while it is not illegal, it's like just not cool, man.
Yeah. So anyway, that was my big rant for this week.
All right. Well, I'll take the lead on this one so you can cool off. Pour yourself a drink. Put your feet up. So the next one, this is not a bill, so we're going to move on.
Are we talking about 888 or no?
No.
Okay.
888 was the wind tech.
Wind
You guys
failed.
discussed that a lot last week.
But it failed.
So it failed.
That was new.
All right. That's the end of that story, though.
Okay. Yeah, it failed.
So the last thing we're going to talk about here is State Question 799, which is not yet officially on a ballot, but it does have ballot language. So this is the measure led by Senator Tom Coburn, and I know you guys discussed this last week as well. This is the proposed veto referendum, which I think is a mouthful, but basically it would be a state question on the ballot for us to vote on that would repeal all the education money that we passed. So he's got to get a bunch of signatures. They submitted their ballot title, which is basically another phrase for ballot language or how it appears on the ballot. And I'll read it to you now. Proposed ballot title for referendum. Yes, Scott.
Does it say all taxes are bad and evil and no one should ever pay taxes ever?
No, it does not.
Oh.
Good guess, though. That is his stance, I believe, how I understand it. The measure reads, this measure seeks to repeal House Bill 1010XX. The bill passed during the second special session of the 56th legislature. House Bill 1010XX raised the gasoline tax per gallon from 16 cents to 19 cents, raised the diesel fuel tax per gallon from 13 cents to 19 cents, raised the cigarette tax 50 mils per cigarette, and raised the tax on the gross production of oil, gas, or oil and gas in the first 36 months of a well's production from 2% to 5%. A yes vote is a vote in favor of this measure and to repeal the higher taxes. A no vote is a vote against this measure to repeal the taxes. And then, shall the proposal be approved for it or against it? This is my deal with ballot questions. It's like the wording is always complicated and difficult and a little misleading. And so even as an educated fellow who's been following this, reading it's like, okay, so what does yes mean? What does no mean? Before we get to the election in June, we'll put out a voter guide about whatever state questions are on that ballot. And just to clarify again, this is not yet officially on a ballot anywhere. Coburn and crew have to get 40,000, 50,000 signatures. So there are some movements out there to like encourage people not to sign the petition, basically, which is a funny effort and maybe a little difficult. If they get the signatures, and they have I think 90 days to do it, maybe only 60 days, I forget. But anyway, if they get it, then it will go on a ballot, and we'll have to vote on it. The last time this happened, it got voted down. All right, if word gets out about this, and it is and has been, I think voters will understand that voting against this would gut education yet again. It would just undo all of that work we went through to get this money for teacher pay and classrooms and whatever, and it won't happen until after it's already started, and it's just going to be a huge mess.
Funny story, among other things.
Funny haha, or am I going to cry?
Yeah, the second one would be that what it would probably do, assuming that we have a third special session for the marijuana, what it would probably do is force a fourth special session, because if this was to go into effect, if they were to get enough signatures to go to the ballot, and they got a stay to keep all of the taxes and raises from going into effect at the beginning of fiscal year 19 on July 1st, the legislature would have to come back and rebalance the budget.
Yikes. And it would be massive cuts.
Yes.
And they would probably spread them out across the board, which would mean massive cuts for lots of people.
Yes.
Jeez. Just
completely unnecessary.
right. Yes, I agree. All right, well, Scott, that's about all we have for this week.
Yeah, I think that's it. Parting thoughts.
I have one.
Do what?
I have one.
Oh, yes.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I would really like to encourage all of you, just because session is over now, don't think that means that we don't have stuff to talk about. We will still be here every week. We're going to try over the summer to maybe explore some issues in a little bit more depth. Talk about what the legislature did with things like criminal justice reform, some other issues that they got into. So we're going to try and kind of delve into process, I think, a little bit more, and explain how certain parts of the legislature work and function and what things mean, as well as talk about what all we can be doing for the next 6 months between now, election season, election day, November, and the start of session next January.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, look forward to some more events. We're going to do stuff around the state. We want to hear from you. We want to meet you, say hi, shake your hand, give you a hug, whatever. Talk about what's important to you. We want to educate you on how to do really great advocacy. There's a ton of folks out there this year that got a little taste of that, got a crash course in civics, and now they really want to be involved. We're excited to help you do that. We are going to host a Hall and Oaths event again, where we will fill the halls and watch them take their oath of office. That'll be towards the end of this year after the general election, so way in advance. But we're super excited about what's going to happen between now and then. And also, in the much more near future, now that they have officially Sine Dead, I'm going to tabulate who our winner is for the Predict Orama that we started at the beginning of session. I have not even had a chance to look at it this week to see if anyone's even close. I've received one inquiry from one David Glover, who's asked who won.
Of course
thinks it might be close.
David,
So
if you're listening, God bless you.
I told him I would look into it this weekend, so I'll put it into the magic number machine, and it'll go beep, boop, beep, boop, beep, and come out with a winner, and we'll put it out. I'll put it out probably just on social media. We'll announce it next week on the podcast as well. So stay tuned. Hope you won a tote bag. Scott, what if we have more than one? Ooh, and the person gets to come on the podcast.
Yes.
Ooh, that'd be really exciting.
That'd be awesome.
A guest. We shouldn't pack up all these microphones then.
Right?
Yes.
Okay, super. Well, that officially brings us to the end of this episode. Remember, you can connect with us on Twitter and Instagram at Let's Fix This Okay. Scott is at SC Melson, and I am at AndyOKC. You can also like our Facebook page at facebook.com/Let's Fix This Okay. Our website is letsfixthisok.org. And there you can sign up for our newsletter, read our blog, find resources and details about upcoming events. If you like the podcast, please rate us, leave us a review on the Apple Podcast app, Google Play Store, whatever it is, wherever you find podcasts. That'd be great. Our podcast is edited and produced by Scott and me. Let's Pod This is a member of the Mostly Harmless Media Network, and our theme music is provided by the Sugar Free All-Stars. Let's Fix This is a nonpartisan, non-profit organization, and we strive to educate and equip all Oklahomans to engage with government. We encourage you to get involved in any way that you can. Remember, decisions are made by those who